Hey everybody, Alex here for Nerdy Inc., coming at you with another episode of Nerd Talk, and today we are talking about sequels, both movie and video games. We're just taking a look at what are some of the ways that franchises can sort of keep themselves going. So our conversation starts off with Steve sort of diving into spiritual successors, or something that sort of has the heart of the original intact. I decide to go on and talk about sequels that weren't afraid to shake things up and afraid to sort of take the original and flip it around and take a different direction. And then I tasked Ryan, our newest member of Nerdy Inc. I made him go through his vast recollection of movies and talk about some of his least favorite sequels from the last 10 years or so, just to sort of parse apart why we thought those movies didn't work, sort of joke around with how they fell flat and what they could have done better. And then we end on a speculative note, talking about some of the movies that we are excited for, some of the movies we're worried for coming out, and how we think that's going to go. So anyway, I will be back at the end for some clarification and recaps, but for right now, on to the conversation. So today we are joined by Steve, my regular co-host.
Hello.
And we're also joined by a new addition to Nerdy Inc. This is Ryan. He will be doing some movie reviews with us.
Yay.
Yeah, so Ryan, say hello to the wonderful people.
Hello. How are you guys doing? You can't answer me because you can't. Because you're not on the Skype call.
Yeah, they'll earn it one day. One day they can retroactively go back and join the Skype call. So, today we are talking about sequels. We're talking movie sequels, video game sequels, maybe book sequels. I don't know. I'm not. Maybe you guys will throw one in. But that's what we're going for. And so, I'm going to actually pass this off to Steve, because this was something you wrote about on your site. So, I guess if you want to get started with sequels and sort of your idea of a spiritual successor.
Yeah, sure. So there's like three different kinds of sequels, really, that I would talk about. One is direct sequels, in which the original story was meant to stand alone and then they added more. Think something like Taken, which we'll get back to later. That's usually driven by monetary, reasons, like, oh, something was really successful and people liked it, let's make another one. I'm not going to talk about the following, which is series sequels, so anything like Lord of the Rings, Hunger Games, Harry Potter, anything that is extended, that is just one big continuous story broken up into chunks, is kind of irrelevant to this discussion. And lastly, my favorite kind of sequel is spiritual successor, which would be follow-up to a game or movie that does not follow the original formula of the first one. It completely departs. It may not even have the same characters or even similar plot. So an example of that, which we could all probably chime in on, in the movie world at least, is Alien and Aliens, where Ridley Scott really created a atmospheric horror worlds in the original Alien. And the reason why Aliens is so successful is because it does not try to do what the first one did at all. It just went straight out action. It's a completely different kind of movie, but it still works. It still fits in the same world. It still feels real, but you get two completely different experiences watching it. And it basically comes down to personal preference, which one you like better. So, I mean, what do you have like thoughts on the Alien films? We're going to ignore 3 and 4 because things get like kind of muddled up there.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think James Cameron sort of saw the opportunity to jump in on that franchise and sort of twisted it into something, I don't want to say twisted because that sort of implies it was bad, but he sort of made it work into his own directorial style. Yeah. Whereas Ridley Scott, it was obvious that that's what he was trying to make as a horror movie. I personally like the first one more. That's just
Me too.
Yep.
Okay, we're in consensus then.
Yeah, well, that was easy. The other one I'll throw out video games wise, is, I don't know anybody out there there's plenty of people out there who like Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, which are RPGs sort of like Final Fantasy. And the deal is Chrono Trigger was beloved by many, and it was a typical RPG, but it's super good. It's my favorite RPG of all time. And they went to make a sequel to it a few years later, and it had completely different characters, and it was completely different worlds, completely different plot. So everybody was like, what's going on? Why is this so different? Where's all these other characters? But that's totally okay, because the director went on to say that the reason Chrono Cross, the sequel to Chrono Trigger, was so different is because he said it was the result of the trigger pulled there's no actual trigger, but the result of the actions in the first game. So you were playing something that was directly tied to the first one, but not in a recognizable way at all. So you get two completely different experiences, and it's super good. And then the last thing I'll talk about is Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2. So Demon Souls was another RPG that was action-oriented, had super good boss, super good levels, kind of the Mario sort of format, like World 1, 2, 1, like that sort of stuff.
Right.
And then when Dark Souls came out, it had the same core gameplay. It was still action-y. The level design was still really good. The bosses were still really good. But the difference was the world structure and the story was completely different. Everything was interconnected. Everything was really dense. You got a completely different feel from just playing the game. Just the art direction was really different. And Dark Souls is my favorite game, one of my favorite games of all time, but that doesn't discredit Demon Souls in any way, because again, it comes down to preference for people like one or the other, for specific reasons. And then Dark Souls 2 came out and basically just tried to copy Dark Souls 1 instead of doing something original like Bloodborne looks like it's going to do. And Dark Souls 2, in my opinion, was a failure, mostly because it had to live up to Dark Souls 1, just because it shared the same name, because it wasn't a radical departure. You're looking at those things as if they're the same thing, and which one is better, which is obviously going to be the first one 99% of the time. Whereas you don't really get that with Demon Souls and Dark Souls because they're so different, and they tried to achieve two different things, even though they're kind of the same, So I don't know if there's a better example of that in movies or Demon Souls and Dark Souls, but Ryan, I don't know if you have.
Turok is probably a good example of that too. You had the Turok for the the M64, and the whole point was in these genetically enhanced dinosaur things with guns. And then they released another one for Xbox 360, but they were actual dinosaurs. It was it was almost like Jurassic Park. Instead of you have to save the world, it was you're in Jurassic Park.
That's almost kind of rebooty too. It sounds like because those were so far apart.
It was a bad game.
I remember playing the demo when it came out. It was stabbing dinosaurs in the neck.
Yeah, well, that's always fun.
All right, so while we're still on video games, I guess I want to go into my quick points about sequels that sort of, I guess they're halfway between what you say is a spiritual successor, and then the other thing is just another studio just want to make another one, half for monetary reasons and just whatever they want to make another one. But one of my favorite examples of a sequel that just completely outdid the original is Portal 2, because Portal 1 was this very eerie game. Yeah, it had a couple jokes in here or there. There was the whole thing about the cake being a lie, and it was a very dark game. So it was a very isolationist game, and it was something that when I saw Portal 2 was coming out, I said, how can they really recreate that? How could they recreate, Gladys's betrayal and sort of that semi-plot twist? Are they really going to try to make another cake joke? How are they going to do this sequel right? And I should have just left my faith in Valve, because the sequel, I think, blew away the predecessor in every way, primarily because it didn't try to recreate that lonely isolationist feeling. It didn't try to have another twist and scare you with Gladys trying to kill you. It didn't make another cake joke. It just threw in that one little Easter egg about the cake, but it didn't try to say, hey, remember this meme that we made? It's back. And so I thought Portal 2 did a wonderful job in creating a new game out of, I guess, the ashes of the old one.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, for most, it's a lot easier to say this for video games because there's certain technological improvements that allow things like that to happen. But there's definitely a huge refinement process from Portal 1 to Portal 2, just in terms of how tight everything was and how expansive they were letting everything be. And you don't really get that in movies, I don't think, where the sequel will be better because you feel like they put the time and effort to make it better. You know what I mean? It's always kind of lazy, if anything, But anything like Uncharted, that has direct sequels, the second one is a huge leaps and bounds, way better than the first one because they took what they had and then just ran with it, So, there's a lot of good examples. We could go on forever about that.
And then another example, switching gears into movies, something that really blew me away in terms of it just completely beat its predecessor was the most recent Captain America movie, Winter Soldier. That's sort of muddying the waters of what a sequel would mean, just because you could argue that it's not a sequel to the original Captain America, but that it's a sequel to The Avengers and Iron Man 3 and some of those movies that came in between. It's sort of hard to make that route and say it's a pure sequel, but I will for the sake of argument, just because I want to talk about what a great movie it was, because I really liked the first Captain America, and I thought it did a wonderful job making this period piece that really was ironic and very meta in a way. And then the Winter Soldier basically said, well, here we are in the modern day. What would be Cap's issue now as opposed to what was his issue in World War II? And it completely, I think, just reinvigorated the franchise because not as many people liked the first Captain America as I did. And they just twisted it into a political thriller, a spy movie, and it sort of shook up the genre in terms of
I thought it was a great movie. I thought they did a very good job with that.
That was one of the things that I was very blown away with in terms of that movie, and I was glad because if they tried to just, it was such a departure from every Marvel movie thus far, where you had a superhero come into his own, and you had a bad guy, like a one supervillain sort of created as a result of the hero, and they come up together and they have one fight, and then the hero sort of loses, and they have a final fight and win. That formula was shaken up with this movie, and this was Marvel's first departure from the original superhero formula into say we can make a superhero movie that's also X, and that's one of the reasons why I think this movie is such a great sequel.
I think that's part of the fun of like the Marvel universe as a whole, though, because there's a lot to play with timelines and stuff, and it doesn't feel like they're making sequels so much as just like telling individual stories, like they're very conscious of the fact that it ties into so many larger things that they don't feel constrained to just copy and paste the first one, because they can go in a crazy direction and see if it works and that sort of stuff.
I wish they would do a Hawkeye Black Widow movie, because you watch the Avengers and they show you like little clips of them fighting together in this other mission that they keep referencing this Budapest thing, but there's no movie or no real in-depth discussion on what happened. So I think they already opened the door. I think they need to go inside and then shut it.
And that's the beauty of sort of Marvel's sequel model, is that they don't need to establish, while technically Hawkeye and Black Widow would be the first in its own franchise, it also wouldn't, because it would be sort of a sequel to the Avengers at the same time. So that's sort of one of the benefits that Marvel has with their structure.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would be a prequel to the Avengers.
That's true, technically.
Because that was all previous.
So it's funny that you mentioned prequels, because I just want to mention my one last movie here, which is The Godfather Part 2. I will admit that as an Italian, this movie has a special place in my heart anyway, but I'm curious how sort of the process went for Francis Ford Coppola sort of pitching the idea for this movie, because I've read The Godfather and it's not structured the way The Godfather 2 is written. You just sort of get sort of glimpses into Vito Corleone's past. You don't actually, the story doesn't jump back and forth in the way that the movie does, to the point where a lot of the prequel side of the story was invented for the movie. And I thought that was extremely well done, because so much of the first Godfather was focused on the war between the five families and seeing who's a rat in which person's organization, going against all this corruption. And the second movie sort of said no to all of that, and it said, this family's trying to legitimize itself. We'll go down that route and talk about them getting into the casino business, but at the same time, it's important to know how we got here. And just thinking back to Star Wars, telling a prequel is never easy, and sometimes we don't care about how a character got to a certain place, because we don't need to see Anakin Skywalker murder a bunch of children with lightsabers to necessarily think that his story is interesting.
That was sad. That was really sad. Why you gotta bring that up again? It took me like 4 years to get that out of my head. They trusted him.
But Francis Ford Coppola walked a very fine line in that, and he did a good job pulling off the idea of giving the character enough backstory to make us care and understand how he became who he is, but not giving us an entire prequel trilogy's worth of backstory that was muddied by Jar Jar Binks and a whole bunch of other crap. And when I think, and now I'm looking at, The Hobbit, which is, while it's still rooted in Tolkien's book, that tried too hard to be a predecessor to Lord of the Rings, and that fell flat too for a lot of fans. So it's interesting to see how Francis Ford Coppola walked a very fine line on saying, I know how much prequel to give these people to make it still be interesting.
I think, yeah. I mean, don't know what to say besides to agree with you on that, because I think it's also the amount as well. You get just that right amount of backstory stuff, because it is an interesting backstory. Like, you do kind of want to know, like, how do you become a mob boss? Like, how does that process start? It's not really the same as like a villain's arc like Darth Vader, where like he's bad in the end, right? Because like we didn't even really know the end result of like The Godfather Part 2, right? Like when you're watching the Star Wars prequel, you know that the end result is Darth Vader's gonna be bad, right? So then it's just like, okay, what's gonna make him bad? What's gonna set him over the edge? But there's no real end result for The Godfather. It's just kind of like, how did he become a mob boss? Like, how did that happen? Like, I don't know. I'm sure there's some cool stuff there. Let's make it meaningful and interesting, and also ties into the role of American, what it means to be successful in America and all that sort of stuff. So you had really good thematic elements bolstering that part of the story up as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's I too don't know what to say other than agree with you on that one, because that's one of the reasons why The Godfather is such a rich and interesting story. I guess I'll hand it over to Ryan now. As Ryan, you said that you have a lot of sequels that you want to rip apart and say they did not work. So I'll turn it over to you now.
All right. So you told me this was my assignment this morning when I was driving to a show. So the whole 7 hours I was driving, I just was working on a list. So we're going to go through a few of these. First one, just because it was fresh in my head because I just watched it, Taken 3 with Liam Neeson. That did not need to happen. That movie did not need to occur.
I forget, did anyone actually get taken in that?
No, Taken, okay, so Taken 1, right, the daughter gets kidnapped. Taken 2, the wife gets kidnapped. Taken 3, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to ruin it for you. Taken 3, the wife gets killed and he gets framed. And the whole movie is about him trying to figure out who killed his wife and then trying to fix it. So it has nothing to do with Taken at all. So it makes no sense. And he has another movie coming out with Ed Harris, and I'm a huge Ed Harris fan, but it's the same movie. It's Taken 3 like squared. It's the same thing. So like, it really is, and I'm kind of sad that Ed Harris is a part of it because he's one of my favorite actors.
That's like when what was that movie? Unknown came out at the same time as Taken.
Yeah.
It was like basically sort of the same deal, I guess.
Yeah, and then that same movie was him on an airplane. Like it was the same. The same. Taken 3 is the airplane movie that he was in. It's the exact same movie. So then that's that. That just didn't need to happen. And then the next one is Sony's Spider-Man. Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire was Spider-Man. The first one came out. It was alright. I didn't think it was great, but it was okay. And then Spider-Man 2 came out, and yeah. And then Spider-Man 3 came out, and he went all emo and started dancing on tables, and that ruined it for me. So
didn't Sam Raimi admit he like messed up with the third one at some point recently?
He just came out and said he tried to do too much with the third one, and so the third one didn't work. So we did get an apology from Sam Raimi about emo Spider-Man dancing on a table. However, I'm going to have to disagree with you on Spider-Man 2. I think Spider-Man 2 was an excellent movie. And
Spider-Man 2 is better than Spider-Man 1, but I just can't get Spider-Man 3 out of my head. I just can't.
That ruins it for you?
It ruined the whole thing. It just ruined. It's like you baked a really, really nice cake, and then your dog just throws it on the floor. It just ruined it. So there's that, and then let's what else? Us. Oh, okay. So, The Mummy and The Mummy Returns, right? Classic movies, right? Then they had The Scorpion King with The Rock. All right, it was okay. And then they had Scorpion King 3 and 4. 4 just went out. Just to give you an idea of how bad these movies are, Scorpion King 3 and 4 never even made it to theaters. They went straight to DVD.
Classic.
All right. Oh yeah, and Jet Li played the bad guy in the third Scorpion King, which I don't understand that. So
now
yeah,
didn't they also then make another Mummy too? And there was like Abominable Snowman, and there was
yes, they did.
Tomb of the Dragon Emperor or whatever.
Yep. Yes. And I think that was the Jet Li one.
Yes. Oh yeah, it was. Mm-hmm.
But it was all that same kind of thing. It was that same So
see, I'd never seen any of the Scorpion King things, or even like I remember like IMDb like dumpster diving one day and like coming across those movies and reading everything about them, but
the first one's okay. The one with The Rock and he's in it, and Kelly Who. That was that was okay. That wasn't bad. They had some cool parts in that. This one kind of hurts to say because I'm a huge fan. My favorite movie is Ocean's 11. It's my favorite movie of all time. I don't care what anybody says. I just love Ocean's 11. And Ocean's 13 was phenomenal. And Ocean's 12 just made me upset.
I think that's the common consensus too, because I completely agree with you. Ocean's 13 is actually my favorite in the franchise, just because
okay.
it's also
Al
Pacino and there's a bunch of Godfather references in there.
Yep.
But Ocean's 12 was
awful.
And the thing is, it's because they tried too hard to raise the stakes and to make everybody seem one step ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, the last 5 minutes of the movie were really confusing.
Well, there was that. There was I don't understand why they all intentionally got arrested, like Joker and Loki and Silva, except there was no real end game. Other than they just had Julia Roberts pretend to be Julia Roberts. And that was how they got out of jail.
And then, but I mean, I think the reason why 13 was also way better was because 13 was it didn't play on Ocean's 12 at all. It was a totally different problem they had to solve, and so it was fresh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with the exception of at the end when that French guy tried to steal the diamonds at the end on the top of the hotel. Other than that, it was a totally different problem, a totally different scenario, a totally different approach. And so Ocean's 13, I thought, wrapped it all. Ocean's 13 was exactly what they needed. Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I think the worst movie I have on this, oh, man, it's tied. Okay, I have a two-way tie for worst movie on this list, and you guys can figure this out. So I'm going to give you both movies, and I'm going to rant about each one. First one is Home Alone 4, okay?
Yes, I haven't seen it.
Home Alone 4.
Yeah, I never even made it that far. After 2, I stopped.
After 2, I stopped as well.
So neither one of you have seen Home Alone 3?
No.
Okay, so Home Alone 3 was different. It was okay. It was different. It had different characters, different protagonists, different antagonists. It was a totally different type of Home Alone. But it was okay.
They're basically the same movie.
Yeah. Home Alone 4, though, was just... The gist of Home Alone 4 was that his parents are never home, and he's the kid of, like, 2 multimillionaires. And so, like, these thieves try and come in and do something. It was just awful. And then the other movie on this list that I think ties with that as far as horrible is Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull.
Yes.
And
awful.
My problem with Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull is this. The Crystal Skull, that whole theory of the alien skulls and things, those are real things. Like, they actually have crystal skulls. Like,
there is a mythology around all of those.
Yeah, it's an actual object, or a bunch of objects. But then they went and made this movie, and then at the end, the aliens come down and try and abduct people, and it made it was just weird. It was very, very... It would have been better as a documentary than it would have been as a movie.
It's strange because, like, Raiders is sort of, I guess, the same setup, but just everybody knows that the Ark of the Covenant is like an artifact, as opposed to Crystal Skulls, which seems like it's out of left field because it's like less known in the like historical thing. But then, they're kind of similar because, the climax of Raiders, obviously you get the reveal of the power of God in the Ark and all this sort of stuff. And it's basically the same thing in the Crystal Skull, but like dumb because CG aliens, and it's like super on the nose with it and like teach me everything and then like blow the what's her name's face up. But whereas like, the original Raiders, it was sort of more this ambiguous, it was still about power and stuff like that, knowledge, but it was still kind of ambiguous. The God didn't come down and like whatever, he just sort of like the lid of the Ark blew up and all this weird stuff happened. So,
well, I guess that's one of the reasons why I think Crystal Skull failed so as fantastically as it did, was because I think the first 3 Indiana Jones movies were steeped in sort of spirituality and faith, and it's to then say, well, we're going to take away all of that and put in aliens and monkeys teaching Shia LaBeouf how to swing and gophers.
Oh, I forgot about that scene.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's worse.
And then gophers who watch Indiana Jones ride by on a rocket-powered car, and a nuclear blast that you can survive with a refrigerator. It's just every creative decision went unchecked, and I don't know why.
What's weird is like the second time I saw the movie, it was on I went to see it in theaters, obviously, and came out and was severely disappointed. And then I saw it on TV like a year later, and I was watching, and I'm like, actually, like this isn't that bad. Like this isn't as bad as I remember it being. And then like you hit that halfway point where they start doing all the weird shit with the monkeys, and then that's it. Just completely goes downhill from there.
The guy gets sucked into the anthill.
Yeah, that was probably the high point.
To the anthole.
So I have one question for you guys. Since Ryan, I know you've seen both movies because I watched both movies with you. Steve, I have a question. I don't know if you've seen either of these movies. Sharknado or Sharknado 2?
No,
Ooh.
I have not seen those, and I can 100% tell you why, because this irks me. So, all right, wait, let me build my rage up so I can let it out. Okay.
And let me preface, before you unleash all your rage, let me say I love both of those movies.
Yeah, okay, so so make your point first, and then I can go on about how much.
So I liked Sharknado because obviously you liked it because it was, it was real bad and it was stupid and, really bad effects, and every reason why you like cheesy movies is because you love to make fun of them while you watch them. And I liked Sharknado 2 as a sequel because it recognized that you were watching it because it was stupid. So they didn't try to recreate a serious world in which this is happening. They said, "Oh, you want stupid? We'll give you stupid." And so even in the world of Sharknado, they saw that it was a stupid thing to happen. And so that's why you end up with Al Roker on TV saying that a twister with teeth is coming to the field. That's why you get Tara Reid with a buzzsaw on her hand, like she's
Ash.
Yeah, like
did it for me.
Yeah, like she's a cyborg. That movie knew that it was stupid. The characters knew that it was stupid, and so I kind of liked it as a successor.
Which movie was it? Was it the first one or the second one where he's holding a chainsaw and gets swallowed and then cuts his way out of the shark that just happened to have the girl who was eaten?
That was
the first one or the second?
That was the first one.
Because
there was something about, I feel like they were like throwing bombs I really don't remember. It didn't make any sense.
It was the kid's idea. Yeah, it was the son's idea.
Okay, well, yeah. Steve, go ahead. Tell us why you dislike it.
That's precisely why I refuse to watch those movies. Is because like the Asylum is always known for making really bad movies, and they're known for making really bad movies that tie into popular movies most of the time. Like Titanic 2 is an Asylum movie. They make all the sci-fi originals. So the reason people like watching bad movies, I think it's like, I like watching bad movies because I like watching somebody try to make something earnestly and intentionally. Like you're watching somebody's hopes and dreams be built up and then like just not reaching those aspirations at all.
Like so, Plan 9 from Outer Space?
Yeah, exactly. Ed Wood movies are the perfect example of that. It's like endearing because there's clearly a lot of heart behind it, but like it's so bad. You know what I mean? So like that's why it's great for me. And my problem with Sharknado is that they tapped into that and they knew that they were making bad movies. So they try to get people to laugh with them instead of at them. And I'm just not into that at all. Like I'm laughing at you all the time. I'll never laugh with you. Asylum.
You see, when I watched Sharknado 1 and Alex was there both times, we just had like 7 or 8 people come over and just laughed our ass off for 3 hours.
That's you can do that with an honestly made bad movie. And
see, I don't know. I mean, I can't say this for certain, but the first Sharknado was taken a little bit more seriously than the second one.
I don't think so, though. Wasn't the tagline like Sharknado enough said or something like that? Like they knew what they were getting into.
They did, forget the actor. He said this was the only movie he could get. Well, the guy who directed the movie said he genuinely tried to make he wanted the movie to like be watchable. Like he didn't try to make it as stupid. Maybe I'm thinking of something else, but I think the first one was made a little bit more earnestly than the second one. But I like the fact that the second one didn't pretend to be earnest. It'd be one thing it'd be one thing if they said, "Oh, we're trying really hard to make this movie, and oh, look at that, it turned out to be crappy." But as if they didn't pretend to be trying. They just they admitted right up, we're intentionally making a stupid movie so you can laugh at it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the same thing with...
I don't like being manipulated.
Scary Movie does the same thing.
Well, Scary Movie was purported to be a comedy right off the bat, though.
Well, you're right, though. With the second, when they put out the second, knew full well what they were getting into, what they were already into. And so it was just like, let's just see what we can get away with. And so things like putting Perez Hilton as a cameo, just so many different like weird cameos. And at the end, Tara Reid with a buzzsaw hand cutting the shark in half, like to save the day, was just It was just awesome, like, but in the worst way possible.
I think there's probably a good way to tie this discussion up, and I think it involves talking about Alien 5.
Are you talking about the new Alien they just announced or Prometheus?
The new one they just announced with Neil Blomkamp. Blomkamp.
That's the one that they're going back and they're just saying this is the one that's going to take place instead of Alien 3, right?
Pretty much.
They're basically retconning the last two movies.
That's the idea. Which is kind of weird because some people apparently really like Alien 3. And I'd have to rewatch it because the first time I watched it, I did watch the assembly cut like everybody tells you to, which is like the director's cut equivalent. And I remember thinking it's like not awful, but it definitely wasn't as good as the first two. But maybe, I don't know, maybe I'd appreciate it more.
Well, it's interesting that they're saying this movie is going to undo our two worst sequels because that's sort of what the X-Men did with Days of Future Past, because the third X-Men movie was, pretty poorly handled. Cyclops.
Which third one are you talking about?
The Last Stand.
The Last Stand?
Yes, the one where it ended in a very unsatisfactory way for a trilogy, and Days of Future Past basically undid all of that. Because when Wolverine goes back in time, he prevents Magneto from killing the president. Then he goes back, he wakes up in the present, and Cyclops is still alive, Jean Grey is still alive, a couple other satellite characters are still there in ways that I don't remember off the top of my head. But it's basically the studio saying, we want to undo X-Men 3 because we want another shot at the story. And that's when you mentioned what Alien 5 is going to do is undo 3 and 4. It just reminds me of now studios are like sort of recognizing that fans are demanding good movies and that they will have to retcon in order to sort of please them.
Makes me worried though too, because I'm not a huge crazy fan of Neil Blomberg, because Blumkin, because the first one, District 9, I really enjoyed like a lot, even though I thought it was like heavy-handed, but that's okay. And then Elysium, I thought was utter garbage, through and through.
So does he.
A single thing I enjoyed. He mentioned his mistake, but then everything I've been hearing about Chappie sounds like the same thing. So come on, Alien 5 is like Charlton Copley is going to be the bad guy, obviously. Like, it'll probably take place in some slums in that, like South Africa, Johannesburg. I don't know. Probably not. I hope not. I hope Charlton Copley isn't even anywhere near it because I would just be like, oh, this is a Neil Blomkamp movie, not an Alien movie.
Well, I guess one way to wrap this up then is Steve, you sort of got the ball rolling on this, is we have many sequels coming out in the next coming years. What do you think is going to be good and what's going to be crap?
Ooh, okay. Are we counting Jurassic World?
Yes, we are.
I thought it was going to be good. I'm super worried about it now. So, I guess you could say I think it's probably going to be crap. That's severe undershooting on my part because I really want it to be good. What else? Terminator Genesis is going to be awful. I think Star Wars Episode 7 is going to be good, at the very least. I think it'll be good. I think it'll be a solid movie.
Mm-hmm.
The new James Bond's coming out.
Yeah, James Bond will be good too.
That's going to be solid.
There's nothing really wrong with, everything that's shaping up.
They have a fresh slate to work on now.
What do you mean?
They got a new...
Oh, right.
It's still, what's his name though, right?
Ray Fiennes
they pretty
and
much
Daniel
have a blank slate.
Daniel Craig. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you have any other ones that you think are going to be either good or awful?
I think sequels coming. Okay, well, first of all, as far as like rock solid, dead awesome, Avengers 2, Age of Ultron.
Oh, I forgot about it.
That is going to be just fantastic.
Yeah, that trailer that came out.
Dude, that is.
Yes.
That movie. I don't even need to say anything. That movie's just going to be perfect. That movie's going to be great. Jurassic Park, I agree with Steve. I want it to be good, but at the same time, now that they branched out and now the dinosaurs are attacking like random cities, I don't know. Seems kind of a mix between that and Godzilla, and I don't know if they can pull that off right. And they
genetically engineered a bigger dinosaur just because they ran out of dinosaurs to scare us with in the movies.
Because they used the Spinosaurus in the third one. They already used up the big dinosaur. So now they got to make a new one.
Yeah.
So I'm worried about that. I think Terminator's going to be pretty okay. I don't know. I think it's going to be good. What else is coming out that I think...
Mad Max does look good, even though I've never seen it.
Yeah, Mad Max does look good.
And then I guess I just want to say I agree with you. Avengers is going to be it's going to be next level awesome. I don't have any worries on that one. The only other one that I really want to talk about in terms of how I think it's going to be good is I have a lot of faith in Star Wars right now because J.J. Abrams is a Star Wars fan. He doesn't like. There was a couple episodes of Lost where he joked around about how annoying Ewoks were. He's not a fan of. He's not a fan of the crappy parts of Star Wars. And I think he gets Star Wars, and I think he's poured his heart and soul into creating something that lives up to the reputation. And I don't know, I just think he gets it. And so I have high hopes for Star Wars Episode 7. I think it's going to be quite good. So that was our conversation on sequels. I hope you enjoyed it. As I was editing this, I sort of realized my Sharknado point didn't really come across as the way I wanted it to. I guess I never really thought that the director was making a serious movie or that he was really trying to make something that would be critically acclaimed. But when in making the original movie, they weren't going for a cultural phenomenon. They didn't realize that it was going to be this big deal. They sort of thought it was going to be a movie that would sort of fall into obscurity, be a sci-fi movie. It was going to be typical. But instead, this one got all the credit, and this one got all the attention, which is something that the second one didn't try to avoid. It knew that it was going to be heavily watched. It knew it was going to be picked apart by people all across the country. So it didn't hide it. It said, you want to pick a movie apart? Pick apart this. And it gave us something that was just bananas. Anyway, I thought I'd just clarify that, make sure that everyone knew what I was talking about. I don't want people to think that I really thought that anyone making Sharknado was making a legitimate, serious movie. Anyway, there you have it. If you've enjoyed this conversation, like, rate, comment, subscribe. All that good stuff is much appreciated, and I will see you next time.